6 weeks ago, I, along with tens of thousands of people, took myself off to South Beach, Miami, Florida, the United States of America, for the first day of the World Cup 2026. The colour, the flags, the football shirts, the dancing, the conversations that took place that day, I will never forget. It was truly exhilarating. Thousands of people full of anticipation, full of hope about what was to unfold over the next 6 weeks, full of delusion, you might say, full of serious hope and expectation for some people, about to set off on an amazing journey where the world came together for this sporting festival we call the World Cup. And I was in and amongst it. I call this podcast Fan 48. I hope to try and encounter and have a conversation with a fan from each of the 48 competing nations in the World Cup. And honestly, I could have done it all that day. I could have met a fan from each of the 48 competing countries that very day. Of course, that wasn't the point. But I did meet loads of people that day, and it set me off excited, inspired to go on this stupid odyssey around Canada, Mexico, and the United States, East Coast and West Coast, on this, yes, travelogue, this personal adventure. But I wanted to try and do something creative, give my experience a focus beyond the football. And now I sit here in an arid, dry Clapham Common back in London with an opportunity to reflect on that whole experience. And what struck me that day in Miami was the expression of identity. Everybody was adorned in something, be it colour, the football shirt of a nation, a flag, a piece of national dress, a comical expression of national identity. Sometimes that was very deliberately their country, their national shirt. Sometimes it was the shirt of their mate. Sometimes it was not their country, but to express their admiration and idolisation of a particular player, sometimes from a different country. Sometimes it was to pay homage to someone in their family or their ethnicity or their origin or their cultural background, not necessarily one that they would identify with now, but they wanted to express that in some other way. And that visible expression of identity is something that has really struck me, particularly now I'm back and the World Cup is over, and how that has started to dissipate and we're merging back into the anonymity of our daily lives again. I'm really fascinated to think about that, but more on that later. And of course, from a sporting point of view, everyone was on the start line, waiting for the gun to fire them off on their race in the World Cup. Who knows where they would end up, be it not getting out the group, making it to the round of 32 for the first time, making it into the semi-finals, the quarterfinal, dreaming could they be the ones to make it to New York in the final. For some teams, of course, it was their first experience at this. Think of those smaller countries, Haiti, Cape Verde, and the journey. They had no idea about what was to unfold for them. Memories that now we know will live on for generations, inspire people to come into the sport and beyond for years and years to come. And so the tournament began. Each country, each fan group, each city with an opportunity to express their character. Think of the Scots and Boston and the relationship that's been formed there indelibly for generations to come. The Canadians marching in their red shirts towards their stadiums in Vancouver and Toronto. The stunning backgrounds of the stadiums in Monterrey and Guadalajara in Mexico. SoFi, the super stadiums of SoFi, Atlanta and Dallas. The Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders bringing that American culture into soccer or football as we would call it. Seattle, that spaceship stadium plonked right in the heart of the city, and how the fans and the games and the experience pre and post game merged into each other because of the location of that stand. And of course, in Miami, where I spent a lot of time, with the amazing fan parks down at Bayshore, South Beach becoming a real focal point for, of course, all the tourism of the world coming together and celebrating together down on South Beach, and that amazing stadium with the fan park around it, which played host to the Scots and Brazilians playing bagpipes, the Brits and the Norwegians, the Norway Row inside, outside stadiums on South Beach, right in the heart of Times Square in New York. Fantastic moments that will live long in many people's memories. Then there was the football itself, some extraordinary stories for each country. Cape Verde's game against Argentina, what could have been Egypt's amazing plucky performance and the controversy that surrounded that result. Morocco, again, not surprising many football people going long into the tournament. 8 out of the 10 African countries getting out of the group stages. And of course, England, Jude, Harry Kane, Jed Spencer's final last-ditch tackle in the penalty box, as good as a goal itself. The frustration of Congo. Would the adventure continue? Would my adventure continue? The extraordinary experience of Mexico City, which I'll talk about in a minute, the heartbreak of Argentina, the frustration and gall of that experience, and the mini redemption of the third place final against France. 10 goals, reputation saved, job saved for Thomas, perhaps. But, of course, loads of controversy as well. The conspiracy theorists diving into the unfair nature of Argentinians' results. Donald Trump's intervention against the Balogun red card. The banning of a referee not even allowed through immigration pre-tournament. The incredibly unjust experience of the Iranian national team having to fly in and out of America, totally disadvantaged from start to finish. The hydration breaks, a 30-minute long halftime show where even the performers themselves couldn't be arsed showing up for more than 15 seconds. Madonna, we love you, but what are you thinking? Gianni Infantino, always putting himself at the centre of attention. Donald Trump himself, the dignitaries, the failure to acknowledge that football, the most democratic working class of all global sports, was grabbed and held on for the rich and the privileged, excluding the very people who turn up week in, week out and make it what it is through exorbitant pricing, ridiculous food and beverage offering in stadium, with the exception of Atlanta. Well done, Atlanta's owner, for resisting that temptation to fleece the fans who travelled around the world, spending thousands of pounds on travel, accommodation, tickets alone, to jab in the knife in the back and charge them $15 for a weak beer. Then there was my quest to set off to try meet 48 fans from 48 competing nations, to sit down, have a conversation and find out about their experience, their relationship to sport, and what this global sporting festival says about our connection, our commonality, and our difference. Now, I didn't quite get the 48. I made 40 out of the 48. But of course, very quickly, I realised that in itself wasn't the objective. That said, if you are from Uzbekistan, if you are from DR Congo, if you are Austrian and you want to reach out and have a conversation about the World Cup, I am open and ready. But of course, it really wasn't about collecting this arbitrary number of 48 football supporters. It was all about the conversations. The Bangladeshi cricket fan I had on the train from Seattle to San Francisco. The Bolivian football fan I met on that very first day in Miami, who, whilst of course wasn't there supporting his own team in the tournament, wanted to be part of it, volunteered to be part of the Miami FIFA structure, volunteering in the fan parks and the stadiums and having a totally different experience to many of us, and bringing all the joy that we know volunteers to these major events like the Olympics do. If you've ever been to those events, be it London 2012, Paris recently, it was the same with the World Cup. The volunteers bringing the energy, bringing the glue to connect all the fans in and around the stadiums themselves. And I really think about some of the people I met along the journey. DJ Black, the Panamanian DJ. We sat together in a sports bar in New York City, him speaking Spanish, me speaking English, swapping photos on each other's phones, laughing and giggling, bantering in different languages, but connecting over this extraordinary experience and anticipation of that rather dour England-Panama game to take place days later in New York. But whenever I think of him and how I see him and follow him on Instagram, massive smile on my face. I think about the bravery I developed over time running up to Denny in San Francisco and tagging along with him and his mates to watch Germany in a beer garden in San Francisco. I think about the crazy Aussies, the world slap champion, slapping me across the face in Seattle that day. Aaron, the conversation I had recently, the Turkish fan, who spoke so eloquently about the hope and expectation and the disappointment experience from exiting way earlier than he hoped for in the tournament, but his reflections and the experiences of being in the stadium, despite the result and the connections he made with the fans in and around the stadium itself. Brian, the proud Ecuadorian there with his dad traveling to the Ecuador games and now back to his life flying passengers around the world. Hopefully, if you've been listening to the podcast or you want to go back to it, you'll develop your own favourite conversations with some of the characters I met along the way. But when I think back to my experience, I think there's a few things that will really ping out. There is the experience of the sport itself, being in those extraordinary stadiums, huge, big American modern stadiums, and the theatres that they represent. For someone, with a theatre background, and you look at those arenas and see these gladiatorial spaces, big coliseums, steep sides where people come to watch extraordinary athletes plying their trade and doing amazing things, the stories untold, emerging through the narratives as you witness it live in the moment, the heroes and villains born and how we get behind and support those. I mean, the tension I have experienced in some of those situations have been amazing. The 11 minutes in Mexico City, I'll never ever forget holding on in those moments. The elation when people scored and the deeper relationship that I developed as an England fan has really, really surprised me. I felt massively connected to those players in those stands, to the people around me, to the people in the opposition fans, particularly in Mexico as well. And that really, really surprised me. I don't know if it's because I haven't had the opportunity to follow my team leads week in, week out and develop that deeper relationship to it. But just by going week after week to watch England, I felt more passionately patriotic and invested than I have done for a long time in a sporting stadium. Not just because of the experience of watching them in the highs and lows in the game, because of the possible outcome, because they got so close to that pinnacle of that recognition. And of course, only one team can ever get that. But what they achieved really was, on reflection, despite all the disappointment of that semi-final, was amazing. I think this group of players really, really did represent us fantastically with their heart and their passion and their adaptability and their resilience, as well as their talent. We had some fantastic moments, both ends of the pitch, that we should be really, really proud of. And it makes me want to continue that journey and invested in that for the future. Mexico City. Oh my God. I mean, if you ask any England fan who followed people around the stadiums, I bet when they say, what was your highlight? Yes, they'll talk about Jude's header in Mexico. Yes, they'll talk about Harry Kane banging it in from the edge of the box. Yes, they'll talk about Big Dan Burns' header again in Mexico. They'll talk about Jed Spencer's diving last-ditch tackle against Argentina. These great iconic moments that will be replayed and replayed and replayed. But I bet you, when you ask them what was the highlight of their experience, they will talk about being in the Azteca Stadium. They'll talk about the generosity and warmth of the Mexican fans. They'll talk about the cathedral that is that stadium. They'll talk about the oppressive weather and thunderstorms and the rain delay. Everyone will have a story to tell about a conversation or experience they had with a Mexican fan, a hug, an applause, a joke, a song. And that really was the best of us. Now, don't get me wrong, we saw the worst of sport as well in and around stadiums. It wasn't without violence. We saw, I've ranted about it, to much reaction on social media about the negative sporting culture that exists in Argentinian sport. No, I say sporting culture, by the way, not Argentina, not Argentinian people, but the sporting culture of Argentinian sport. It's a really important key difference that I would encourage people who vented back at me on social media to make that distinction. And there's lots of reasons why that might come about. But for me, what sport really is about equality and fairness and an even playing field. And when that doesn't happen, it does bring the whole house of cards crashing back to earth, in my opinion. But I do think about identity. I know I spoke about this before, but I was very struck by the permission that this experience, this tournament, this focal point gave for people to come together to talk and to express their identity in really positive senses. Now, of course, that was about the flag. It was about the football shirt. It was about colour and wigs and makeup. It was about movement and costume, and how that was a gateway to open up conversations, to connect, to explore, to talk about similarity, talk about difference, to have fun, to take the piss, to sing, to express yourselves, to banter, all those great things. It was also, of course, an opportunity for people to express their difference, to challenge, to sing, to be rude, to find confrontation. Sometimes really on the edge of dark expression and fun and banter and a fine line. Me walking down Miami Beach into the den that was Norwegian fans after a few pints. 2 hours later, that could have had a very different expression. We've seen it on social media of Argentinian fans in and amongst England fans in and amongst Argentinian fans. I mean, I've waxed lyric about Mexicans, but the Mexico-Ecuador game was, by all accounts, really tense. Pretty horrible experience for some fans. Crushing, negative expression. I think deaths experienced in and around the stadium as well. Horrible, horrible experiences. But I mentioned it before. I saw it in airports. I saw it when landed in London. I saw it as the number of teams started to be reduced in the tournament, that you got less expression of that and everyone blends back into the jeans and the T-shirts of daily life and the anonymity that that brings. And I sort of missed that and I mourn that. I definitely want to spend some time reflecting about how the expression of my identity in all its forms, be it my northernness, my Leedsness, my sexuality, my gender, my nationhood, my values, my morality, how all of that can continue to be expressed in really healthy ways, in ways that open up conversations, in ways that draw people towards you to start to seek connection and discussion in a way that, of course, we've lost so profoundly in our day-to-day life. And we've seen witness really played out in social media ways, in very positive ways, but profoundly in negative ways. I mean, I'm massively struck. I document a lot of this podcast on social media. I'm not massively into social media, put some energy into it, not enough to really capitalize on the experience for my own benefit. I was less interested in that. In many ways, I found it a bit of a grueling experience of having to invest time to create that sort of content. But of course, it brings an audience to this content, to these conversations, I hope in really constructive ways. And thank you, by the way, for those who have engaged with this. We've had listeners on Spotify and YouTube and Apple into tens of thousands. We've had interactions on social media into hundreds of thousands. 2 posts alone have had over 500,000 views. But it's notable, those 2 posts that have got the biggest traction have been the fantastic Norwegian guys bantering about the relationship between Sweden and Norway. And for those who commented on that, it's really worth drawing attention to the tongue-in-cheek, fun nature of that post. But you wouldn't necessarily get that if you read the comments alone. It created a lot of response, a lot of discussion, people defending the guy who made the comments, people attacking the guy who made the comments. Over 250,000 views for that division that people might have seen, the provocation of that. My conversation about Argentinian sporting culture was by far the biggest engagement with any conversation I published on that platform. So I think that in itself is notable about the quality of discussion that takes place in those mediums. Whereas face-to-face, universally, 99% of the time, it was empathetic, about connection. It was curious. It was interested. It was interesting. And that's a big, big takeaway for me about how I choose to engage with people going forward beyond the confines of this tournament. However, it is also important to say, and I've obviously had an overwhelmingly positive experience where connection and conversation has been at the very heart of it. It's been interesting for me also to reflect, I think, about why I've had those conversations. Yes, it's been about me walking around with this microphone, which immediately draws people towards you to have these conversations. But it's also been about my openness, my mindset, my willingness just to go up and start a conversation and be prepared to be rebuffed in that. I mean, it barely ever happened, but that's a choice that I can make. And so often I absolutely have, in many circumstances, and I will continue to put my head down and go about my own situation. But of course, that does close me off to some of the conversations that I've been able to enjoy through this process because of that mindset shift. So that's something I've got to hold on to. But I really don't want this narrative, this monologue, this rant to be without context and proportion, because yes, overwhelmingly, for me, it's been a massively positive experience. But I've been very aware of the contradiction that exists in this whole experience. Yes, America has been surprising and generous and open and warm, but I've never seen such poverty and homelessness, visible in Western developed cities as I have across the United States. Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, particularly those West Coast cities, quite horrific levels of deprivation, homelessness, drug addiction, mental health issues visible across the streets with people walking by. The obscene wealth of this tournament, the sponsorship, the ticket prices, how that's excluded people from being part of it is hypocrisy and juxtaposition that really is ugly. And we mustn't be deluded into thinking that this warm, fuzzy glow around the World Cup is only a positive thing. Nor must we fall into the trap of thinking about FIFA as this corrupt money-making machine. I've had conversations on this very podcast with people who work at FIFA talking about the extraordinary work that it does way behind the cameras. That is real. Sport can do those things. We mustn't be deluded into thinking this wonderful hiatus of celebration, collectivity and globalization and nationhood and the celebration of all of that is somehow going to mitigate the horrific inequality and division that is prevalent in the world. But what it must serve, from my point of view, the legacy of it must be to remind us that what people really, really want to do more than anything, in my experience, is to connect, is to celebrate, is to find joy, is to find shared experience. Very, very few people want to place energy into division and inequality. Very, very few. And so our leaders and lawmakers, and perhaps more critically than ever in this world, our business owners, our organizations, our big companies have got to get out of the glass boxes and the hospitality suites and get into the fan parks and the bars and restaurants around these sporting events and realize that the very people who support their businesses want that more than ever, and they don't want to be ripped off by them, and they don't want the inequality, and that their business's role really should be to enable and facilitate that connection and conversation and positive human experience. I also don't want to pretend that this is a developed political manifesto. It's far too unnuanced and simple for all of that. But that's just an expression of the reflections that I've had, having had this experience. But on a deeply personal level, it's also really important for me to just to express my thanks to people who've helped me have this wonderful experience. Bob, my great mate, who's helped hugely in the preparation for this, challenging me, supporting me, tireless reassurance and confidence building as I've been on the road, giving wonderful encouragement and feedback. And I'm really grateful to him for that. Tim, whose conversations that didn't make the podcast through my failure to record them effectively, foregoing about nationhood and identity and anthropology, as well as the support of a friend, have played right through my thinking for the whole journey. To Mark, my mate FIFA, whom without none of this could have happened, not just in terms of friendship and the fun that we've had on the road when we've had the opportunity to meet up, obviously the access to FIFA ticket platforms and the generosity of giving his home to me in Miami. So grateful. And to my mate Chike. It's funny because life has a habit of drifting people away from each other unconsciously, and suddenly you find a vast chasm between your history and your present. And sometimes fate comes along and reconnects you, as it did with Cheeky and I in London when he was over here doing a play. And that set the ball rolling on a truly memorable experience of us coming together and going to those England games together, having that experience in Mexico, which I know for both of us will live long into our memory. And the opportunity to reconnect to someone that you love and respect and admire, and to have that experience and build those shared memories really has been everything. So I'm really grateful to him as well. To my friends and family, I've absolutely loved the FaceTimes and the opportunity we've had to give each other a little bit of a taste of one another's experience, from beer gardens and barbecues inside stadiums and vice versa, stretching across oceans and connecting in ways that are only possible through technology. But I'm really love those, and they've been a huge part of the experience. I genuinely don't know what comes next in this podcast feed. I've loved the evolution from the amazing 3 years of Stage Door Athletic with Jack and James into this personal adventure for Fan 48 during the World Cup. Who knows what's around the corner for this, but stay connected if you can. There's no need to unfollow or unsubscribe, and hopefully this feed can evolve into something fun in the future, and it'd be great for you to be part of that as well. So as I sit here back in the UK already with a bag packed on my way into work, having gone to the garage to get new tyres on the car yesterday, paying the credit card bills of this adventure, going out to earn more money to fund the next one, reaching out to friends that I've missed again. Life has flooded back in. But I think, without making this some sort of Jerry Springer final word, I think for me, I've always found travel, theatre, art, sport, community, shared experience, conversations with strangers are about expanding your understanding to give you greater context for the choices you make on a micro level, personally, in your own decisions, in your relationships with friends and family around you, but also on a political and geopolitical level to help you find your place in the world, to have an influence on whatever level you choose to explore it. Now, I'm very aware for some people, this whole experience, sport, the World Cup, football, is a load of nonsense. They've got no relationship to it whatsoever. And I totally understand that point of view. But I guess if you're listening to this or you're watching this, you've got some relationship to sport, to football, to culture, or maybe you just supported me, in which case, thanks very much. So I'd be really interested to find out what your response is, and do reach out either in comments or emails or drop me a text, or hopefully we can have a conversation face to face sometime in the future to find out how you've reflected on it and if there is any legacy for you beyond the sweating heat and late nights watching England fail or succeed, however you perceive it. But I think for me, some of the things I'm going to try and keep hold of, and a legacy I'd like this to have, are a few things. One is conversations in person are better than conversations online. When you have experiences, try and hold on to what they were, not what they were not. Be curious and seek connection. You'll almost always be surprised. Be proud of your identity, own it, express it, celebrate it, and recognize that other people are doing exactly that. And that is a wonderful thing. And England they might just win a World Cup in my lifetime. Thanks for listening. Stay in touch. Bye for now.